Exodus 31, 1-18, God chooses, calls, capacities, sends and supplies. In chapter 31 we will find the choices of the artisans of the tabernacle work as well as guidance on the Holy Sabbath and the 2 tablets of the testimony. It is God who chooses, then calls, then enables, and then sends. Certainly, God did not observe Bezalel and then chose him, called, trained and sent. Before, since the mother's womb, even before the foundation of the worlds, God had already separated this one to do the functions that he would need to do from now on. Really studying the Bible is to discover that God is the one who does everything, according to Isaiah 64:4, because from ancient times it has not been heard, nor with ears has it been perceived, nor with the eyes has a God been seen besides you, who works for that waiting for him. God's choice, Rom 9:11 Romans 9:11 since they were not yet born, nor had they done good or evil, so that the purpose of God, according to the election, would stand firm, not because of works, but by the one who calls, God chooses. He chose us since the foundation of the worlds, even before we were formed, God chose us. See what Paul says to the Ephesians, F1, for just as he chose us, in him, before the foundation of the world, to be holy and blameless before him, and in love. The determining factor in choosing God is God's purpose. This choice in the election is based exclusively on the sovereign will of God and not on the planned actions of man. It was the Lord himself who said that we did not choose him, on the contrary, he chose us and appointed us to go and bear fruit, and our fruits remain, so that whatever you ask the Father in his name, the Father grant it. John 15:16. In the first chapter we also see John, verses 12 and 13 saying that everyone who received Christ gave them the Father the power to become children of God, namely those who believe in his name, who were not born of blood, neither of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. God's call Romans 9:11 since they were not yet born, nor had they done good or evil, so that God's purpose, according to the election, would stand firm, not because of works, but by the one that calls. After being chosen, God calls us in due time. Will God call all the chosen ones? Yes, certainly so. For each one he has a specific calling according to his sovereign choice and his eternal purposes. God's empowerment 2 Corinthians 3:5 Not that we are capable, by ourselves, of thinking anything, as of ourselves, but our ability comes from God, 2 Corinthians 3:6 which also made us able to be ministers of a New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit, because the letter kills and the Spirit quickens. Once chosen and called, we will now be empowered by God to be ministers of a New Testament, not of the letter, but of the Spirit, because the letter kills, but the Spirit quickens. God sending Romans 10:15 And how will they preach if they are not sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who proclaim the gospel of peace, of those who bring joyful news of good things. After being trained, we are ready to go and work for the Lord in his field. Now it is God who sends us and who puts in us the certainty that we must go. Now we are facing this challenge from God who chose us, called us, trained us, and sent us. Therefore, we must now obey him by going through villages and towns, wherever there is a soul that needs to hear the word that is powerful, then by ear, to generate life and salvation in him. It was God, then, who elected, called, trained and sent Bezalel and Aholiab to all the works related to the temple so that it was built exactly according to the model that had been shown by God. It is interesting to note here that Paul, in Icor 3:5-17, represented himself as Bezalel, in the shadow of God, and Apollo as Aholiab, the Father is my tent, from the temple of the New Covenant in Corinth. In fact, in describing himself as the prudent builder, 1 Corinthians 3:10, and Apollo as the other builds on him, the foundation that Paul had laid down, Paul borrowed terms from Bezalel's description that appear in the Greek Old Testament, verses 4:35-32-34. Beg. Then, completing further instructions regarding the tabernacle and all its furnishings, God speaks of his covenant and the Sabbath. Just as God worked 6 days and rested on the Sabbath, he was directing the people to work 6 days and rest on the Sabbath, in order to seek him and walk in his presence and remember his perpetual covenant. This chapter ends with God's speech saying that he gave Moses the 2 tablets written by God's own finger, certainly in Hebrew or Aramaic. It is not known for sure if they were 2 copies of the law or if the 2 stones were a continuation of the other. After electing, calling, training, sending, he will supply, yes, support and maintain those who are serving the Lord in the ministry, whatever it may be, for the glory of God.